She was laughing. Standing on a balcony high above Busan, the city glittering beneath her like scattered diamonds, Elizabeth was laughing. Not politely, not softly. The kind of laugh that takes over your whole body and doesn't ask permission. And the man standing beside her, tall, lean, quietly handsome in a way that didn't need effort, was laughing too, his shoulder almost touching hers. The harbor lights reflecting off everything below them, the kind of view that costs something to own, the kind of night that doesn't feel real. He turned to her slightly and said, "There is something strange about you, and I am still trying to figure it out." She smiled, said nothing. Then he added, almost like he was joking, but not quite, "In case you ever see me fall on the floor, don't hesitate to rush me to the hospital." She laughed harder. He laughed with her. Busan glowed. Now hold that image, because 3 months before this moment, this man did not know her name, and she had no idea what world she was about to walk into. Everything you are about to hear started with a crash, a woman on the ground, and one decision made in 3 seconds that changed 2 lives completely. Her name was Elizabeth, 33 years old, Black Korean, a police officer who had just finished a long shift and wanted nothing more than to get home, take off her shoes, and eat something warm. She was driving through Busan traffic on an ordinary evening, the kind of evening that looks exactly like every other evening until it doesn't. The car directly ahead of her lost control. Brake failure. The vehicle hit a roadside pillar with a sound that cut through everything. Metal, concrete, impact. A woman inside, 60 years old, dressed like someone who mattered, someone whose clothes alone announced a certain kind of life. She tried to get herself out, made it halfway. Then her body gave out completely and she collapsed onto the ground beside the car. Her money scattered across the pavement. Her phone slid. Her belongings went in every direction. Elizabeth saw all of it happen from her windshield. She was right behind her. She watched the whole thing unfold in real time. She could have called it in and waited. She was a police officer. That was the correct procedure. Wait for the ambulance. Secure the scene. That was what she was trained to do. She was out of her car before the thought finished forming. Running. People had already gathered, the way people gather in Busan, in any city, when something goes wrong. Some had their phones out recording. Some were shouting. Nobody was actually doing anything. Elizabeth pushed through all of it. She got to the woman, checked her breathing, and then she did something that would matter more than she knew. She got down on that pavement and gathered every single belonging. Money, phone, everything scattered. She collected it all, got this woman into her own personal car, and drove her to the nearest hospital herself. No waiting, no procedures. Just, let's go. At the hospital, the medical team took over immediately. The woman was unconscious. No ID on her, no name, no emergency contact, nothing in her belongings that identified who she was. The nurses asked Elizabeth if she was family. She said no. They looked at her. She stayed anyway. Over an hour, she sat in that hospital beside a woman she had never met before tonight. A woman who could not thank her, could not speak to her, could not even open her eyes. Just lying there, breathing while Elizabeth sat in a plastic hospital chair and waited for nothing in particular. Why did she stay? She could not have explained it properly even to herself. Something about leaving felt wrong. Something about this woman lying there with nobody, no face she recognized, no hand to hold hers, felt wrong in a way that Elizabeth's body registered before her mind did. When it got too late to stay any longer, she made herself stand up. She told herself she would come back in the morning. She drove home, went to sleep. Morning came. Elizabeth kept her word. She went back to the hospital before her shift, walked down the corridor, turned into the room. The bed was empty. Clean linen, no trace. Like the woman had never been there at all. Elizabeth asked the nurses. Transferred. That was all they could tell her. No forwarding hospital, no contact information, no name to go on. Nothing. She stood at that empty bed, and something quiet moved through her chest. Did I do something wrong? Was it because I left? Should I have stayed the whole night? She did not say any of it out loud. She carried it out of that hospital with her, got in her car, drove to work, felt strangely low about a woman whose name she had never even learned. She told herself to let it go. She told herself the woman was fine. She had clearly been collected by someone who knew her. She was somewhere better now. She tried to believe that. 1 week passed. Her shifts continued. Busan moved around her the way it always did. The woman from the road faded to the back of her mind, the way things fade when life keeps going regardless. Then one morning, Elizabeth walked out of her apartment and stopped. A black luxury car was parked close to her door. Not just any car, the kind of car that makes you aware of it immediately. A man in a suit stepped forward before she had fully processed what she was looking at. He held out an envelope, said nothing, just extended it toward her and waited. She took it, opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. 3 words. Nothing else. Come see me. The handwriting was unhurried, steady, the kind of writing that belongs to someone who has never once had to beg for anything in their life. No explanation, no pleas, no signature, except a name at the bottom. The suited man turned to leave. Wait, Elizabeth caught him. Who sent this? He looked at her once. Boksoon. Then he walked away, got in the car. Gone. Elizabeth stood outside her apartment, holding an envelope with 3 words inside it and a name that meant absolutely nothing to her. Boksoon. No face attached to it. No world. No warning. Just a name and an instruction from someone confident enough to believe the instruction would be followed. But something in her stomach already knew. It was the woman from the road. She didn't know how she knew. She just did. She did not run the name through the system. She did not pull it up on any database the way a police officer should when a stranger leaves a note at their door. She just followed the address after work. Something in her had already decided before her mind caught up with the decision. She drove there in the same car she had used the night of the accident. Pulled up near the gate and parked. Then she sat inside and looked. The compound stretched out before her in a way that took a moment to absorb. Not because it was flashy, because it was deliberate. Walls that meant something. Guards positioned at every point like breathing architecture. Luxury so controlled and deep it did not need to announce itself. It simply existed, the way mountains exist, without asking anyone's permission. Elizabeth sat in her car and looked at all of it. Who exactly did I save that night? She got out, walked to the gate, and before she could do anything, a guard moved immediately, both hands on her, shoulders turning her back the way you turn someone who has made a wrong turn. No conversation, no warning. Elizabeth did not flinch. She held her badge up. I am a police officer. He looked at the badge, then at her. The badge did not move him. The tension between them thickened into something with texture. Then his earpiece crackled. He went completely still, listened. And when he looked at her again, something had shifted in his eyes. Not warmth, not welcome, just a different kind of assessment. He stepped aside without a word. She walked through. The gate closed behind her, with a sound that was final in a way she did not want to examine too closely. She was escorted through the compound by a man who said nothing, past guards who noted her without reacting, through a silence that had weight and intention behind it. Then she was brought into a grand living room and left standing at the entrance. Bok-soon was seated in an elevated chair across the room, leg propped, immaculately dressed. Not the clothes of a woman in recovery, not the softness of someone who had been through something hard. Everything about how she sat, how her hands were folded, how her eyes moved to Elizabeth the moment she entered. It was the posture of a woman receiving. Like this was a meeting she had called and Elizabeth was simply the last person to arrive. Beside her, angled slightly, a young man was seated, late 20s, tall even in a chair, handsome in a way that was almost inconvenient, the kind of face that would be distracting if his eyes were not so busy calculating everything in the room. He looked at Elizabeth the way someone looks at a variable they have not yet solved. Bok-soon looked at Elizabeth the way someone looks at something they have been expecting for a very long time. Sit down, Elizabeth. First name, not Miss, not officer. Elizabeth. Like they already knew each other, like this was already settled. Elizabeth sat. She was in a room with the two people she had never properly met. One had summoned her. One was watching her like a decision was forming behind his eyes. And nobody had explained a single thing. Then Bok-soon leaned forward slightly, reached across the space between them, and took Elizabeth's hand in both of hers, held it, looked her directly in the eye. You are the one he needs. Elizabeth pulled her hand back, not aggressively, slowly, the way you remove something that landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to be. Instinct before thought. She looked at Bok-soon, then at the young man, then back at Bok-soon. Her mind was already running, reading the room the way she had been trained to read rooms, looking for angles, looking for what was not being said. I don't understand what that means. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. She stood up, not loud, not dramatic, just firm, the way a woman stands when she needs to remind a space who she is. Ma, I saved you because it was the right thing to do, not for this. She did not even know what this was yet. She just knew she wanted no part of it. Bok-soon did not flinch, did not defend herself, did not reach for an explanation. She just watched Elizabeth standing there with that posture and that certainty, and almost smiled. It was the almost that stopped Elizabeth more than anything else could have. Not a full smile, something quieter, something that looked like recognition. Bok-soon spoke to the guards quietly. Elizabeth was brought back, and she sat down again. She would ask herself later why she sat down again. But something about that almost smile, something about this woman's complete absence of panic in the face of being refused, made Elizabeth sit. Bok-soon's voice changed. The receiving posture softened into something else. I apologize. If I said something that made you uncomfortable, that was not my intention. A beat. Then, thank you for what you did that day on that road. Nobody knows what would have happened if you were not there in time. Elizabeth said nothing. She listened. There was something in the woman's voice now that had not been there before. Not vulnerability exactly, but realness. The performance had come down half an inch. Then Bok-soon gestured toward the dining room. Please, have dinner with us. Elizabeth looked at her, sat with the invitation for a moment. Then something she could not name made her say yes. The table was long and immaculate, silver and candlelight and food that had been prepared by someone who took it seriously. Elizabeth sat across from Bok-soon and the young man whose name she still did not know. Food was served. Nobody spoke. The silence had texture and weight and something underneath it that Elizabeth could not identify. Then Bok-soon set her utensils down, quietly, deliberately. She looked directly at Elizabeth. This is my son, and I want you to marry him. The words hit the table like something solid dropped from height. Elizabeth stared. The food caught in her throat, and she reached for water without thinking, her eyes wide, her composure cracking at the edges. Bok-soon did not pause. Have dominion over everything we have built. Not because I am caging you, but because you saved me, and I want you to be part of this family. This is my appreciation. Please take it. The room was completely still. Elizabeth set her fork down. Slowly, she wiped her mouth. When she looked up, her face had gone completely composed. The cop face, the face that locked every feeling behind her eyes, where nobody could reach it. I am a police officer. I have a life, a career. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, not to be purchased. That word landed hard on that table. Purchased. It sat there between them with all its weight. Bok-soon absorbed it. No flinch, no defense, no apology forming. I know. A pause, so clean it felt intentional. That is exactly why I chose you. Something broke open in Elizabeth's composure then. Not anger, not offense, just pure disbelief escaping through a crack before she could stop it. A short laugh. She covered her mouth, pulled herself back together. Ma, with all due respect, you don't know me. I don't know your son. We are strangers, sitting at a dinner table. Bok-soon nodded, slowly, like every word Elizabeth was saying made complete and perfect sense, and none of it was changing anything. Chaewon had not said a single word through all of this. He sat. He ate. He watched. His silence was more unsettling than any response could have been, because it was not the silence of someone with nothing to say. It was the silence of someone saving it. Elizabeth folded her napkin, placed it neatly on the table, rose. Thank you for the food, and for the apology. No, yes. No, no. No argument left behind. She simply removed herself from the room the way you close a door. Clean and final. Behind her, Bok-soon was smiling, and fully this time. And Jaewon, for the first time all evening, looked up from the table and watched the door she had just walked through. The drive home was dark and quiet, and Elizabeth laughed the entire way. Not the polite kind, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and uncontrolled. Both hands briefly off the wheel, hitting the steering wheel, shaking her head at the Busan streetlights passing above her. This woman asked me to marry her son. The laugh filled the whole car, raw and real and slightly unhinged in the best possible way. Because what else do you do when a woman you pulled off the ground 1 week ago invites you to dinner and slides a marriage proposal across the table between the main course and dessert? You laugh. That is what you do. But somewhere around the third traffic light, the laughing slowed. Not because something funny stopped, because something else started. A quieter feeling moved in behind the laughter, the way cold air moves in when a window opens. She could not name it, did not try. She reached forward and turned the radio up and kept driving. She was still in her in work clothes when she sat down on her couch that evening. Did not change, did not eat, just sat and stared at a wall that had nothing useful to say back to her. Then she picked up her phone and called Seo Yan. She told her everything, from the beginning, the envelope at her door, the suited man, the name that meant nothing, the compound that meant everything, the living room with two people who looked at her like they had been waiting, the dinner table, the napkin she folded so carefully before she walked out. I want you to marry my son. Dead silence on the other end of the line. Then Seo Yan absolutely lost it. The scream came first, then the laughter, then questions firing so fast they collapsed into each other. Wait. What compound? What son? She said. What at the dinner table? You folded your napkin and left? The energy coming through the phone was so completely uncontained that Elizabeth found herself laughing again, genuinely this time, the tension of the entire evening, leaving her body in one long exhale. Then Seo Yan went quiet. Not the natural quiet of someone catching their breath, the suspicious quiet of someone whose mind had just shifted gears entirely. What was the address? Seo Yan? Unny, I am looking it up right now. Typing sounds. Fast and focused. Elizabeth waited. The silence on the line stretched longer than it should have, longer than a simple search warranted. And something about that length made Elizabeth sit up slightly on her couch. Then Seo Yan's voice came back. Different, lower, each word placed carefully. Elizabeth, do you know who that woman is? She told her. All of it came out in a sequence that felt almost rehearsed, like Seo Yan had been sitting on this information her whole career and was now choosing how much to release and in what order. Yoon Bok-soon, a name that did not just exist in Busan, but pressed down on it. She did not run the city the way politicians ran it or businessmen ran it. She ran the people who ran those people. Judges, commissioners, harbor authorities whose signatures controlled millions in trade. 3 major crime families answered to her organization, not beside it, not in competition with it, to it. Investigated 4 times by the National Crime Division. Never charged once. Not once. Every witness who had ever been positioned to change something had either disappeared before a court date or walked in and said something completely different from what they had originally told investigators. The organization is so deep in this city's infrastructure, Seo Yan said, that half the senior officers in our own precinct have direct or indirect connections to the Yoon family. Then her voice dropped to something that was barely above a whisper. Unny, there are people in our own building who would report this conversation. Elizabeth was completely still on her couch. The wall she had been staring at looked different now. The son took over, operations 2 years ago. Yoon Jae-won. He runs it differently from his mother. Quieter, tighter, no loose ends anywhere. More ruthless and completely invisible. Nobody in the prosecutor's office has a single clean line into what he actually controls. Elizabeth heard her own voice come out smaller than she intended. I ate dinner with these people. You weren't just invited to dinner, Unny. A pause. You were invited to join the family. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The weight of that sat between them through the phone line like a third person in the conversation. Then Seo Yan's tone shifted again. Away from the file, away from the facts, into something personal that she did not often let out. She told Elizabeth carefully. The Yoon organization had touched her world before, not abstractly, not as a news story, but specifically. Her neighborhood, someone in her family, Something that happened years ago that Seo-yeon had grown up alongside without fully understanding until she became a police officer, and the pieces arranged themselves into a picture she wished she could unsee. She did not say everything, just enough. And that was the thing that changed the shape of the entire conversation, because suddenly it was not just information Elizabeth was holding. It was a warning that came from somewhere real, from someone who had skin in it. Unnie. Seo-yeon's voice was quiet now. Careful. Are you safe? Elizabeth did not answer immediately. She sat in her apartment, her ordinary apartment with its ordinary furniture and its ordinary walls. And for the first time that evening, she looked at everything that had happened, not as a woman who'd had a strange night, but as a cop examining a situation. The compound, the guards, the car that had known exactly where she lived before she ever gave anyone her address. The son who had sat and watched her with those calculating eyes and never said a single word. And the old woman who had taken her hand and said, "You are the one he needs," like it was not a request, like it was already true. Elizabeth sat alone long after the call ended. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark and stared at her ceiling and let the evening run through her again and again. By the time gray morning light came through her curtains, her mind had begun to settle back into something manageable. She was a police officer. She had made no promises. She had said nothing she could not walk back. She had walked out of that house, clean. It was over. She almost believed that completely. Then Boksoon made her next move. A knock on Elizabeth's door. She opened it and Jaewon was standing in her corridor. Not in the compound. Not behind guards. Not in that elevated world of his. Here. In her building. In the ordinary fluorescent light of her floor. Wearing something dark and simple. Looking like a man who had been told to be somewhere and had come. She looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then she closed the door. No words. No expression. Just the door, solid and final between them. Jaewon stood on the other side of it. This man who 2 years ago had taken over an organization that 3 crime families answered to, who prosecutors could not touch, who left no loose ends anywhere. Standing in front of a closed door in a regular apartment building. He stayed there for a moment. Then he turned and left. When he walked back into his mother's house and told her flatly what had happened, the door, the silence, no words exchanged at all. Boksoon looked at him. Then she laughed, deep and genuine and completely unguarded. The kind of laugh Jaewon had not heard from her in years. It filled the room with something warm that had no business being there. He did not find it funny. "Iyama." She waved him off, still laughing, eyes bright with something that looked almost like relief. "Good. She is exactly what I thought she was." Jaewon stared at his mother. "You are pleased." "I am very pleased." The laughter settled. She looked at her son with that steadiness she had carried his entire life. The steadiness that had built everything around them from the ground up. "Go back tomorrow." She closed the door. Then knock again. He studied her face, looking for the logic, looking for the calculation underneath it. Finding only certainty, the immovable kind he had never once in his life been able to argue past. He left the room without another word, but he went back. The next morning, the knock came again. Elizabeth was already awake. Had been for a while. She walked to the door and looked through the peephole, and there he was, standing in her corridor in the early light, alone again. No entourage, no indication that he was anything other than a man standing outside a door, waiting for it to open. She opened it. She looked at him, then past him, left, right, down the corridor. No guards, no driver waiting at the bottom of the building. No black car parked outside. Just him, standing there in the ordinary morning light of her floor, like he had walked here himself and intended to walk back the same way. Something about that shifted something in her. She could not have said exactly what, just something. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Her face was not warm, but it was not closed either. Somewhere between the two. "Your mother sent you again." Not a question. A statement with a raised eyebrow underneath it. Chaewon looked at her. No performance behind his eyes, no angle being worked. Yes. One word. Stripped of everything unnecessary. She had expected deflection, some smooth reframing, some version of "I came on my own," or "I just wanted to talk." Instead, he gave her the plain truth without packaging it, without softening it, without any apparent awareness that honesty was supposed to be a strategy. It was the most disarming thing he could have done, and she was almost certain he did not know that. The pause between them stretched. Morning sounds from the building around them. Somewhere below, a door closed. Somewhere above, a television was already on. Elizabeth stepped aside, just slightly, just enough to make the space mean something. 5 minutes. He stepped in. Did not move further into her apartment than he needed to. Stood just inside the doorway and looked at her space the way people look at a place that tells them something about a person. Not intrusively, just taking it in. The ordinary, furniture, the shoes near the door, the jacket on the chair that had not made it to the hanger, the apartment of a woman who lived her actual life here, not a performance of one. Elizabeth watched him look, did not apologize for any of it. Say what you came to say. He looked at her. "I came to apologize for the dinner, what my mother said. You did not deserve to hear it that way." She studied him, reading every word for an angle the way she read everything. "Are you apologizing for what she said or how she said it?" He held her gaze without shifting. Both. The 5 minutes passed in a quiet that was not entirely uncomfortable. He did not overstay it, did not push past the boundary she had drawn. When he moved toward the door, she did not stop him. He paused at the frame, did not turn around. "Why did you stay that night? At the hospital? Over an hour with someone you did not know?" Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. The question had come from somewhere genuine. She could hear it. Not an interrogation. Something closer to needing to understand. "Because she was alone," she said. Simply. Completely. He nodded once, like that answer had confirmed something he had been turning over without being able to name it. Then he left. Elizabeth stood in her apartment after the door closed and did not move for a full minute. Then life continued, the way it does. Her shifts. Busan moving around her. The ordinary rhythm asserting itself over everything strange that had happened. A week passed, then another after that. No knock, no envelope, no black car outside her building. Silence from that world, complete and total, as though it had never reached into hers at all. A full month went by, and then Boksoon died. The cancer that had been moving through her body long before the accident combined with the injuries from the crash and took what was left. She did not die loudly. Women like Boksoon do not. She died the way she had lived, on her own terms, in her own time, in the home she had built from nothing with hands that had never once asked anyone for permission. Elizabeth did not know any of this until 3 days before the funeral. It was late when the knock came, past 10. She opened the door and Jaewon was standing in the dim light of her corridor, and the shock of seeing him there, after a month of absolute silence, after she had almost successfully convinced herself that chapter was finished, hit her before anything else could. But she stepped back, let him in, stood in her living room and listened without interrupting once. He told her about his mother, the funeral arrangements, the burial, 3 days from now. He said it all in the same controlled, measured way he said everything. No crack in the voice, no visible weight behind the eyes. Just information being transferred. Then he left. Elizabeth closed the door and stood in the quiet of her apartment and felt something settle in her chest that she had not expected. Someone she saved had died. Not the Mafia, not the compound, not the marriage proposal sitting unanswered at a dinner table. Just a woman she had pulled off the ground on an ordinary evening. A woman she had sat beside in a hospital for over an hour because leaving had felt wrong. A woman who had looked at her across a living room with eyes that carried a certainty Elizabeth had never fully understood. That woman was gone now. Elizabeth told herself she would go to the funeral, just to give her last respect. Nothing more than that. She owed her that much, not for the compound, not for any of what came after, just for the woman on the ground who had nobody when she needed somebody. She went. She arrived early, took a quiet place near the back. The space around her filled gradually. People who moved with the particular stillness of those who understood exactly what kind of gathering this was. Nobody cried loudly. Nobody made themselves conspicuous. Everything was controlled and deliberate, the way everything connected to this family seemed to be. Then Jaewon arrived. He came through the entrance and his eyes moved across the room the way they always did. Assessing, automatic, practiced. And then they found her and stopped. Elizabeth felt it before she fully registered it. That stillness, that pause in his scan that was different from the rest of it. Because they were wearing the same color, same design. Neither of them had known. There had been no coordination, no conversation, no planning between them at any point. Just two people who had each stood in front of their own wardrobe on their own that morning and reached for the same thing. Something passed between them across that room. Unnamed, unspoken, the kind of thing that does not need language because language would only make it smaller. Neither of them looked away for longer than was comfortable. If you have been watching this story from the beginning and you felt that if something just shifted in your chest the way it shifted in that room, drop a comment below and tell me. Because this is the moment everything changed. And most people don't even see it happening until it's already done. The funeral moved the way funerals move when the person being buried was someone who held things together. Quietly, heavily, with a kind of grief that does not perform itself because the people feeling it are not built for performance. Elizabeth stayed until the end. She did not approach anyone, did not insert herself into the processions and the quiet conversations happening around her. She simply stayed, the way she had stayed in that hospital room, because leaving before the end felt wrong. When it was over and the space began to empty, Jaewon walked toward her. Not rushed, not hesitant, just direct. The way he did everything. He stopped in front of her. The afternoon light was flat and gray above them, the kind of light that makes everything look exactly as serious as it is. Have dinner with me. Not a question, but softer than a demand. Somewhere in the space between the two, a man asking something real without quite being able to make it sound like asking. Elizabeth looked at him, the same face she had been reading since the first evening in that living room. Still controlled, still measured, but something underneath it today that had not been there before. Something that had been scraped closer to the surface by the morning. Okay, she said. Just that. No negotiation, no conditions attached. 4 days later, she walked into the restaurant. It was the kind of place that did not need to advertise itself. The address was enough for the people who needed to know. Warm light. Quiet that was curated rather than accidental. The kind of quiet that costs something to maintain. Chae-won was already there, seated at a table positioned away from other diners, facing the entrance. He had been there long enough to be settled, not waiting with impatience but waiting with intention, the way he seemed to do everything. She sat across from him. Food came. They ate. And for a stretch of time, neither of them spoke. Not the loaded silence of the dinner table weeks ago. Not the tense silence of her apartment doorway. Something different. The silence of two people who had run out of reasons to perform for each other. Then he set down his utensils, looked at her directly, and when he spoke, his voice had lost the last layer of the control he usually kept around it, like armor. Now that my mother is no longer here, I want us to fulfill her wish, the only thing she ever asked of you. Elizabeth held his gaze, said nothing. Let him finish. Please, marry me. The words sat on the table between them. Not like the first time, not dropped from a height, not landing with the shock of something unexpected. This time they landed differently. Quieter. Like something that had been making its way toward this moment for a long time and had finally arrived. Elizabeth did not speak immediately. The silence stretched, and he let it stretch. Did not rush her, did not fill it with reassurance, just waited with those steady eyes. Then he added, and this was the part that did something to the space behind her ribs. Let us make my mother happy, even if she is no longer alive to see it. And I promise you one thing, I will do everything in my power to protect you. As long as I am alive, nothing is coming for you. Nothing. That last word landed with a weight that was not a threat and not a performance. It was the simplest, most direct thing he had ever said to her. And coming from a man who controlled what he controlled, who had never once said anything he did not mean, it meant something specific. Elizabeth felt something move in her chest, deep and quiet, and not entirely identifiable. Relief, maybe, or the beginning of something that would become love slowly, the way real things do, not arriving all at once, but accumulating, the way water accumulates in a vessel until one day you look and it is full. She smiled. It started at the corners and moved through her whole face, and she did not try to contain it or make it smaller. Yes, she said, I will marry you. Something shifted in his eyes. Not dramatics, not triumph, just something settling. Something that had been held at a careful distance, finally being allowed to be exactly what it was. He reached into his jacket pocket, produced a small box, dark, understated, the kind of box that does not need ornamentation because what is inside it speaks for itself. He reached across the table and took her hand, gently, like he was aware he was holding something that mattered. He slid the ring onto her finger. Elizabeth looked at it, turned her hand slightly in the warm restaurant light. The ring caught it and held it. It's nice, she said. Simple, real, not the words of a woman performing gratitude, the words of a woman who actually meant it. 2 days later, they were standing on the balcony of the compound. Evening had come down over Busan, and the city below them was doing what Busan does at night. Glittering, breathing, moving with the particular energy of a port city that never fully sleeps. The harbor lights scattered across the water, buildings stacked against each other in the distance, the kind of view that cost something to own. He was standing close to her. not touching, just close. The way two people stand when the distance between them has become a choice rather than a default. "Thank you," he said, "for accepting to be my wife." She did not respond immediately, just looked out at the city that had held all of this from the beginning. The road where a car had lost its brakes, the hospital corridor, the empty bed, the envelope with 3 words inside it, the compound gate, the dinner table, the napkin folded neatly and placed just so. All of it had happened in this city. All of it had led here. Then he turned to her slightly, and something in his expression loosened in a way she had not seen before. Lighter, almost. "There is something strange about you, and I am still trying to figure it out." She smiled, said nothing, let it sit. He looked back out at Busan. Then, voice low, almost to himself, "In case you ever see me fall on the floor, don't hesitate to rush me to the hospital." She laughed, not politely, the real kind, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and unguarded. And he laughed with her, shoulder almost touching hers, the harbor lights below them doing what they always did. She had once rushed a stranger to the hospital out of pure instinct on an ordinary evening, and that stranger's son was now standing beside her, asking her to do it again. But he was not a stranger anymore. He was the man who had shown up alone at her door, who had answered yes without dressing it up, who had slid a ring onto her finger in a quiet restaurant and held her hand like it was something worth being careful with. And somewhere beyond all of this, in whatever exists after a woman like Bok-soon finishes what she came to do, she was smiling, because she had known from the moment she opened her eyes in that hospital room and found Elizabeth sitting there. She had always known.
If you felt something in this story, the moment he showed up alone, the matching colors nobody planned, the laugh on that balcony, drop it in the comments. Tell us the part that got you. Subscribe so you never miss our next adventure. Like this video if this story deserved it. Don't forget to tell me which part of the world you are watching from.